this is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, Avoid the Maze has two parts. There's Avoid the Maze, there's Avoid the Maze. You are special. And my guest today, Heidi, is going to be on the one called You Are Special. And the reason being is that the subject matter we're going to be talking about is not just about her, but it's for you as well, and especially parents today, because eating disorders, it just seems like I want to say it's the fad out there, but it seems to be everyone has some sort of eating disorder, and nobody seems to know how to really help us with it. I know I've been talking to my doctor for years saying, I'm so afraid to eat because I gain weight every time I eat. And he looks at me and he goes, don't eat as much. And when he looks at what I eat compared to how much I'm gaining, it makes no sense. I eat less than 1,000 calories a day and I'm active. So they're all different types of eating disorders. So, Heidi, tell us a little bit about what got you into this field and writing books and supporting other people out in the world.
Well, thank you, Karen, for having me. I really appreciate it. I got into the field of disordered eating because I had my own struggles as a young person, as a late teen and into my early 20s. I struggled with my own relationship with food. I was a young dancer and college student and really underfeeding myself. And I studied nutrition in college. I think partly because I was obsessed with food, given my eating disorder, and also because I wanted to learn how to feed myself better and more without chaos.
Right.
And I learned actually that I was eating a lot less than I thought I was supposed to eat as a young, growing person and also active dancer at the time. And it was actually helpful for me to study nutrition. I studied nutrition and psychology, and learned a lot about myself in the process of healing from my own disordered eating, and then wanted to go on and help others in that area. And I thought actually being in the field of nutrition would be helpful because I know that although I had a therapist, a psychotherapist at the time who was helpful, I never talked to a nutrition professional. I never really understood like fully how to feed myself well. And I thought that would be such an important role. And it ends up that it is an important role and an important part of the healing process, sort of understanding this sort of behavioral pieces around food. But as I continued to practice in this field, I learned that it's just so much more complicated than that. There's so many other layers, emotional, sometimes trauma, so many other layers around disordered eating. So I, have continued my own study and continuing education for the last 30 years, and just have a really eclectic collection of skills at this
Right.
point, but have really been enjoying working in this field and now writing books around this topic. So that's sort of where I am now, in my 50s. I look back and I think about sort of that early eating disorder and how it informed my work. And it's just part of my history.
Right.
But it's interesting to think about what I would have done had that not been part of my history. I pivoted obviously in this direction for a reason. So,
It's interesting because when a woman is pregnant, they normally get some training on what kind of nutrition they need to have while they're pregnant. And after they have a child, the doctor tells you what kind of nutrition your child needs. But we seem to learn just this much about it. And then if it doesn't seem to make sense, you know, we start listening to everybody else around us. And in some cultures, it's all about just eat. If you just eat, you'll be happy. If you just eat, you'll be healthy. Um, and I should have known better growing up, seeing that my mother was constantly on a yo-yo diet. Um, when she was feeding her face, as she would put it, she felt really happy until she looked into the mirror and then realized, oh my God, what did I do to myself? And then she would go on these horrible diets, like the cabbage soup diet, and drop all that weight. But then she was starving again and picked up again. Um, and doctors today don't really seem to either have the time or the knowledge in nutrition to provide for us. So, as a nutritionist, what are some of the things that we learned? Because you said you were under eating at the time. So, what did that look like for you?
Well, I can say that just to answer to speak to what you had said earlier about doctors, like most doctors, unfortunately, don't get a lot of nutrition education in medical school. Maybe they're lucky if they took one class, um, but they certainly don't get a lot of education about eating disorders too. So
Okay,
it's not their fault, um, but it's just that they don't get a lot of information at all. And even in my training as a registered dietitian, there are things I didn't learn about eating disorders either that I had to learn both on the job and also from further study outside of my educational program. So I do think there's a deficit in terms of what's out there for us to learn. Um, and you were specifically asking about underfeeding.
yeah,
I think underfeeding happens a lot more than we think, especially among women. I mean, it certainly happens to all the genders, but I think women in particular have a tendency to underfeed, and often women don't understand that underfeeding can both fuel binge eating on the other end of it because it's a bit of a pendulum. When
right.
we're underfeeding, we often then flip the other direction to try to create some balance. And the body like wants that, wants that balance. So it can often cause sort of a back and forth relationship with food between underfeeding and overfeeding. And then also, underfeeding can sort of slow down metabolic processes like the gut, for example, and metabolism in general just slows down as the body's trying to protect itself and take care of itself. And that thwarts people's wishes to maintain their body weight, for example, or to lose weight if that's what they're going for. So playing with weight, like you described your mom and her yo-yo dieting, like playing with weight with restriction can often lead to the opposite of what someone wants,
Right.
and certainly can create a more complicated relationship with food where where you're yo-yoing up and down and actually not nourishing the body in a way that supports good metabolism and health.
So, we're going into holiday time and everybody, is going to be faced with, even if it's just in the grocery store, oh, those cookies look really, really good. Or, boy, it sure would be nice to have an extra drink because it's Christmas or New Year's or whatever. We want to convince ourselves that it's okay. Um, and there are some people who say, it's okay that I binge for the next 2 weeks because then I'll be good afterwards. But that's also not good for the body. So, what are some things that we can do to still enjoy the cookie or the drink without um, harming our bodies and our nutrition?
Well, I think that actually what's the most important thing is kind of one's attitude about it all. Um, so I'm coming at it at a little different angle that it's really these are just choices, right? They're just choices. Like when we're presented with food of different types at a party, for example, or when we're going out to eat and we're trying to decide, shall I have an alcoholic beverage or not? These are just choices. And I think the key is to actually sit with what feels right for my body right now in this moment. What feels like the choice that I'm best, that I could make that really feels like it orients me towards joy and health. Um, and I think if you can keep that in the focus, then you can just make your choices and like sort of live with them, and also notice then the consequences of certain choices, right? Because if you do eat in a certain way at a party, let's say, and you don't feel well the next day, well, then you can just notice that. Not in a way where you're beating yourself up about it or trying to create shame in your system, but actually just taking a look at um, okay, I noticed I did something, it didn't feel good. That's some information for next time when I make another choice. So I do think there's something about being matter of fact around choices and not creating a lot of stress around them that is helpful. I do think it's that stress and that angst and that back and forthness around food
Yeah.
that is, it can often be most problematic, even more so than the actual choices that one's making.
And the
Yeah.
rest of us have to stop being judgmental when we're amongst other people and somebody says, no,
Yes.
I just don't want that drink, or no, I don't eat after a certain time of the day, or whatever, like you say, is the best choice for you. We should not be there shaming other people because we see a lot of that. And especially when families get together, when we sit down to have a meal and it's like, well, try your aunt's stuffing and try your grandmother's mashed potatoes and have a piece of my pie. And it's like, that's more than I eat in a week, and you're trying to force it on me in one sitting. Um, so we
Yeah,
have to
that's
learn
one of
to
the
say
reason. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
no. We have to learn how to say no as well as the others learning how to say, it's okay. You don't have to try it if you don't want to.
Absolutely. I was just going to say I think it's so important to let children learn how to self-regulate. That's a lot of what I wrote about in my latest book, which is called Nurture. The subtitle is How to Heal Your Relationship with Food, Body, and Self. And I think it does start at home. It starts with allowing kids to make their own choices around food. And I agree, like we shouldn't shame young people or adults, and particularly like kids are always watching the language that their parents and the adults around them use around food. So it's, I think, avoiding shaming, avoiding like black and white language, like this is good and this is bad. I think it can be very confusing, especially for young children, if there are foods that they really enjoy that they're hearing all the adults talk about as being bad. It gets confusing. It sometimes creates power struggles around those foods or makes those foods even more charged than they would be otherwise. So taking the morality around food out, I think, is so important.
Well, with my two boys, I never had any expectations of them really eating everything on their plate, especially if I was serving them. However, there was one incident when my oldest was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and I put a teaspoon of peas on his dish. And for 2 hours, it was a fight over him even trying it. And my husband and I now laugh about it because it's like, we're not even sure why we did that because that
Hmm.
was not in our temperament. But we did this one night. He was in tears. We were in tears. We couldn't leave the dinner table. And afterwards, I thought about it and I thought, well, that's crazy. I don't like a lot of things. I wouldn't want somebody to force it on me. And it took me a long time to keep apologizing to him for it. And after that, it was like, you take what you want. I'm not going to put food on your plate. I'm going to make suggestions. I might try to encourage you to try something. And to this day, he hates peas. He won't even look at them.
Of
Um,
course.
that's my fault. But
Well, not necessarily, but I think you're absolutely right that like you clearly you just were doing the best that you could at the moment. I think that's why as a parent myself, I try to write with compassion about these topics because I know, and I have done it myself. In fact, I have several of my own foibles around food with my daughters that I wrote about in my book. And I did that because I wanted to sort of show the readers that like even someone who is in this field and kind of knows better and works with eating disorders will sometimes like say something around food or like force a breakfast on someone um, because they are really obviously it's out of love and maybe some misguided energy in that moment, but you're right. I think in the end, it generally creating a power struggle isn't helpful. It doesn't increase kids' variety.
Right.
And it makes them like sometimes even more stubborn, and gets them out of their bodies in the feeding experience as opposed to being in their bodies, sort of deciding what works for them and what doesn't.
So I was reading in your bio that it's more than just the eating disorder itself. It's what what we feel, what we see in the mirror, our reflection, and how we are amongst other people. Because there are some people who are wafer thin and they see themselves as fat. There are people who are overweight, they don't see it. Um, it also distorts the way we think about our whole appearance. And I know if I overeat, no matter what I wear, it feels tight on me. Even if it's not, mentally, it feels tight on me. Um, if I'm being careful and aware of what I'm doing, my clothes might be tight on me, but I don't notice it. So, is that part of the imaging that you talk about in your bio?
I mean, body image is definitely very different than what the body objectively looks like. Body image is how you feel about your body. Absolutely. And I think that is often what I'm working on with clients who come to see me. Sometimes we're working on their food behaviors, but sometimes we're just working on how they feel about their body. And I'm not always like orienting someone, particularly an adult, towards like at loving every nook and cranny of their body. But it's more about accepting that this is the body that I have. And sometimes it's going to feel great, and sometimes it's not going to feel great. And I'm going to take care of it in the best way that I can. So I'm usually going for acceptance in my work as opposed to like loving the body, up and down. That can be pretty tough in our culture where like bodies are called out and criticized so much, especially people, who don't have sort of the mainstream body type that we see in film, for example, or advertising. I think the goal is to feel good about our bodies no matter what, because a lot of our body's shape and size is related to our genetics. Um, and we don't get too bent out of shape about our eye color, for example.
Right.
But we really get bent out of shape about our proportions of our body. And I think like helping people to sort of see how that's shaped by the culture that we live in, and to not sort of take that in and let the body be a place for them to kind of put some of their own insecurities onto. I think that's a big piece of it. When you're not feeling good about yourself, you might blame your body, or you're feeling uncomfortable about a social interaction, you might blame your body. Um, so it's like kind of noticing the ways in which we use our bodies and um, criticize our bodies and judge our bodies.
I
Um,
overheard a young man not too long ago say that the reason he doesn't get dates is that his physique is not built, and he's very well built. Okay, he exercises it, he has muscle definition, but he doesn't see that. And he thinks that young women don't want him because he sees himself as flabby. And uh, I
Well,
said
I
to
would
him,
say, first of all, he may not be seeing himself accurately. That might be a little
right,
body dysmorphia. And second of all, we all know that like there are couples of and relationships of all different shapes and sizes, and his idea that he has to look a certain way in order to be acceptable is, certainly comes from our culture.
Sure.
We have a very selfie culture right now, very, very image-driven culture. But it can be useful sometimes to understand that that's where it comes from. And that's not really the reality, that like people of all different shapes and sizes have relationships, and thrive in those relationships. So, yeah.
Well, and those are some of the things that I let him share with me rather than me tell him. Um, because we were talking about some of his friends. Well, how are your friends built? What are what do their girlfriends look like? What do their boyfriends look like? And as he was describing them, they look like just ordinary people. And he said, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. And I said, we're all going to complain about something. I mean,
Mhm.
up until my 60th birthday, I wanted to look like every day, I wanted to look like somebody else. Okay. Uh, your hair is curly. I want my hair to be curly, which my hair normally is. Or it was like, no, now I want it straight. Now I want it short. Now I want to wear a size two, whatever it was. I just wanted what looked good on the screen or in the magazine to reflect me. And it was right around my 60th birthday that I thought, I'm me. There may be somebody out there that wants something about me. And when I started taking that attitude, and sometimes I'll just walk through the grocery store and just pick out somebody and say, they wish they had my hair. And it just like makes me smile because instead of me wanting that to look like them,
Mhm.
it makes me feel good that I think they want to look like me. Is that all part of the therapy that somebody would come to you with if I'm just feeling like I can't connect with who I am?
Sure. We talk a lot about comparison, to other people, especially when it's about the body or the appearance. Some of the work is noticing when those comparisons come up and doing some alternative, thinking about it, like you described in the grocery store. And some of it is actually noticing that what's happening in those moments is we're being pulled out of ourselves. We're like no longer inhabiting our bodies and walking about in the world, and we're like being pulled out of them and we're judging them from the outside. So some of the work, which can be a little bit more complicated, especially if it's hard to sort of be in the body, for many reasons. Sometimes when someone has trauma to the body, it's hard to sort of inhabit it and be in the body.
Right.
But some of the work is actually bringing someone back to that state where they're no longer outside, sort of judging it, looking at it from the outside, but sort of experiencing what they're experiencing, feeling the air on their skin, just feeling their feet on the ground, being inside the body, which is really different. I do somatic experiencing work, which, I appreciate as part of that process. It sort of helps people sort of inhabit their bodies instead of, again, being outside looking at them from a judgmental perspective.
And sadly, that's what our society is. It's very judgmental. And
Sadly.
sadly, it does begin at home. And I don't think moms and dads do it on purpose. But sometimes it's like, I just wish you were like your older brother, or I wish you were like your sister. Or I grew up with a cousin who I adored. She was about 15 years older than me. And to me, she was my big sister. But my mother was always saying things like, you know, you should wear your hair like Gloria. You should do this. You should do that. And was always resembling her, but I loved her. So my mother, I think, thought it was a good thing. The difference is that my cousin Gloria was short and petite. Okay. I was never short and petite. Um, and it'd be like, I'm never going to look like that. And if I'm never going to look like that, I'm never going to be like that. And uh, I spent some time with her after I had my firstborn, and I said to her, I want to be so much like you. And she goes, why? She said, I am short. She said, no matter how much I eat, I can't put on an ounce, and that's not good for my health. And she just went through all these things, and I sat there and was like, oh, so you have issues too, just like I do. But from the outside, I thought she had this perfect life. Now, she had a good life. Okay. She was happy, happily married, had children, grandchildren. But until you get to talk to somebody, you sometimes think that you're the only one who's experiencing this. Is that how your clients come into often?
Sure. I mean, we all have our insecurities, right? But the goal is to develop yourself, right? As you want to be. Like you can't be your cousin Gloria, you know, but you can be Karen, and you can be the best version of Karen. And that's, you know, I think that's obviously what I want to help my clients with is being able to figure out what it is that makes them who they are and like, and really makes them thrive in their lives. And it's generally very different for everyone.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So tell me a little bit about the books you've written. Was becoming an author something that was on your horizons for a long time, or was it just something that developed?
Well, yeah, I love that you asked that question because it like relates to the first question you asked me. I probably, if I hadn't developed an eating disorder, I probably would have studied journalism, I think, or something communications oriented in college because I was always writing as a kid, all the time. Um, I did have an unfortunate experience with an English teacher in my high school years, which I would put on the traumatic level. And I think that steered me away from writing for some time, and probably had some bearing on my eating disorder too. And so it's been nice now. I think when my kids were young, and I was spending more time home with them. I have twin daughters who are now in college, but when they were little, I was starting to take writing classes again, and just getting back involved in writing. I started a blog, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, and then sort of developed that over time. So I think getting back to writing has felt like kind of a coming back home to myself in some
Right.
ways. And so in 2018, I published my first book, which was it's called Nourish, How to Heal Your Relationship with Food, Body, and Self. And then a couple years later, you know, with lots of comments from others who sort of thought I should write a parent guide of some sort, I wrote this past year, Nurture, how to raise kids who love food, their bodies, and themselves. And I'm in the process of, I think I'm getting started with writing a third book. So more to come on that, maybe for young people is my plan. So, but yeah, it's not quite an undertaking to write books, but after 30 years in the field, I feel like I have some things to say, and I have some authority behind it
Right.
now. And I had the experience of being a recovered person and also a parent of two daughters who are on their way into adulthood now. And so I definitely have some observations and thoughts. And I put a lot of personal elements in my books as well. You know, I talk about my clients, obviously anonymously, but I also talk about sort of my own experience as a human being and a parent. And I feel like that's some of what has made them resonate with my readers the most.
And parents, when their children have any kind of illness or disorder, um, often take it as, what did I do wrong? Um, my son was diagnosed at the age of 6 on the autism spectrum. And my first reaction, this was in the early 90s when autism was still, what is it really? He went to school one day, he was a neurotypical little boy, and the next day he got the diagnosis, and our lives turned upside down. Um, and I took the responsibility that I must have done something wrong, even though science has told me I didn't.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to overcome that. And that's why this series, Avoid the Maze, You Are Special, I try to let parents know that there's so many things out there that we don't have the knowledge for. And even if we've done something wrong, if we acknowledge it and start to correct it and start to learn about it, and eating disorders is a huge one. Um, I I know too many people who are very, very ill in their 60s and 70s because they never did learn how to eat properly. Some are very overweight and uh, can barely get off of a chair, and some are so underweight that they don't have the energy to do anything either. And it's like, if we had learned about it, if we had had the support, if we hadn't judged, maybe we could get healthier. And I think that's the important part. I don't think you're telling all your clients they have to be thin, they have to be healthy.
Certainly. I never blame parents for eating disorders too. I want to be really clear about that. I think parents and like the home environment and the school environment can have a huge impact on a young person's recovery from an eating disorder, especially if they're supportive. Um, but obviously, eating disorders have so many factors. And I think parents just need information and compassion and help so that they can create supportive environments where eating disorders don't thrive, because it's a cultural problem in a lot
Yes.
of ways.
So
It's
if if one of our listeners said, either I think I have an eating disorder or my child does, we've talked to the doctor just says change your diet, which means nothing because we don't know exactly what is it that we're eating that's, changing us. I keep a diary. My husband laughs at me, but I keep a diary every day of what I eat. And I'm so glad I do because, for instance, today I've had this nagging migraine all day long, and I'm a migraine sufferer, but I know what the difference is. And I look back at what I ate yesterday, and it's not what I ate, it's what I didn't eat yesterday because I did not eat properly all day long. I didn't eat a lot, but I had no protein at all yesterday in my diet. That will make my migraines worse. So I'm glad I keep a diary. However, if I were to go to my doctor and tell him, about the headache, or I'm gaining weight, he'd say, well, just eat less. And I'd say, but what less? What do I cut out? Do I cut out my salads? Do I cut out, my protein? Um,
Yeah, and sometimes it's about eating more, actually,
exactly.
because again, I think we talked about this earlier, like a lot of busy women, underfeed at times, and don't eat consistently throughout the day, to keep blood sugar stable. And, that can sometimes have an effect on migraines for some people. That's a whole other topic and not really my area. I'm not like a migraine specialist by any means, but I do think like that, obviously eating in a way that supports your body and supports your energy level and supports the things that you want to do in life is important. And it's not that difficult to do, but it does require that you're consistent, and that it's like a part of your own self-care routine.
Absolutely. So if one of our listeners wanted to get more information or purchase your book, which would be wonderful because I think we could learn more things if we, have the documentation, how can they find you?
Well, my website has information about both of my books on it, and my website's anourishingword.com. I'm Heidi Schauster, but my business name is Nourishing Words, and that's how you can find me on all the social media, platforms as Nourishing Words. I also write a newsletter on Substack, which is called Nourishing Words. So you can, if you're interested, that's just a free newsletter that I send out bi-weekly that has lots of information on it around this topic. But yes, you can find my books, all the places that you get books.
Okay.
But it's not like if you go to my website, there's a link for all those different places too.
Well, and we'll make sure that's all in the show notes. So
Great.
anybody who says, hey, I missed it all, don't worry about it. It's in the show notes. If you misplace the show notes for whatever reason, you can always contact us at New Cleveland Radio. We'll put you in touch with Heidi because I know how important this subject is. I see it every day. I get clients who come to me, and this is not my specialty at all. And I usually say, I'm going to find you somebody who you could work with because making life choices, there's certain life choices I can help guide when it comes to any kind of eating disorder. I know I have one and I've got to figure that one out too. So I probably will be reading your book and trying to see if I can come up with some answers, or I
I would
will.
love to hear your thought about Nourish, which is my first one.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's the one I'm in the process of sort of revising and rewriting for a younger audience too. But I think that's like, that's a good general book for anyone who feels like, my relationship with food isn't where I'd like it to be. And it's hard not for it not to be. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, I know you grew up in the Diet Pepsi era.
Yep.
So, we have a culture that says less eating is supposed to be good for us when that's absolutely not the case. So, and I think it was, certainly even worse when we were growing up than it is today. I think there's a little more diversity, but there's still a lot of diet culture today too. It's like now it's more about clean eating, um, which can be kind of dieting in disguise as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will be in touch, and I hope my listeners follow up. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. I appreciate it.
Thank you.